SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Australia's largest private sector employer is at a crossroads. Small business employs around 5.4 million people, or 42% of the country's private sector workforce, meaning Tuesday's federal budget is a crucial tipping point. Luke Achterstraat is CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia. He says much of the concern has been driven by record insolvency levels, which have been caused largely by overburdened businesses tangled in new red tape. He discusses the wish list, the watch-outs and the likely outcomes of the budget with Jeff Waters.
Small business really needs a strong endorsement and signs of affirmation and positivity for them in this budget. You know, you might describe this budget as we're at a bit of a crossroads as a country. You saw some figures out from ASIC showing that those insolvency rates for small business, particularly in hospitality and construction, eclipsing those records that we've already set ourselves. So decade high insolvencies. So we are at that fork in the road, if you like. Small businesses asking for not handouts, but support. So incentives, things like the instant asset write-off, which is a really important program that really helps reignite confidence amongst small business. Things like accelerated depreciation that comes from that program can really help small businesses forward plan and conduct some of that investment into more productive machinery. So we really need to see some certainty about those programs. And probably, Jeff, the other side to it, you've got that tax side on one hand, but the other side to it is we really want to see this budget getting around the red tape reduction piece. So we need to see government committing itself to reduce that red tape, to set forward a bit of a deregulation agenda, to remove some of those barriers to productivity. So, we really need to see a productivity budget here. We know that productivity growth is the key to driving living standards. So without, removing some of those barriers to small business, and what I mean by that is small businesses don't always have the large HR teams or the armies of lawyers that larger enterprises have. So we'd like to see the budget actually provide resourcing to help a lot of those government departments provide fact sheets, checklists, information that can be shared with small businesses to better help them understand their obligations. Because the less time small businesses spend on paperwork, the better, and the more time they can actually spend on their core operations. So I think in summary, small businesses looking for tax reform and tax incentives, but also looking for red tape reduction. And they'll be the two measures that we really apply when we do our assessment of the federal budget on Tuesday.
There are so many things to unpack in what you've just outlined, but I suppose the insolvencies and the shrinking of the small business ecosystem, for want of a better term, is quite profound in Australia at the moment. And there have been lots of people just throwing their hands in the air because of the amount of new red tape that has been imposed by this government. You're talking about red tape reductions, and they've been introducing new red tape almost every 6 months or so over the past term. Will this government actually, do you think, cut red tape?
Yeah, look, the short answer is no, Jeff. Based on previous experience, we've really seen a bit of a litany of new regulation being brought in, whether it's workplace relations, more complex definitions around casual workers, restrictions on labour hire, and of course more and more union entry into the workplace. So there's not really a great track record here for this government, but we need to continue advocating, really putting forward our policy proposals, wanting to introduce a red tape reduction task force and looking to work with government on putting forward some of these ideas. But certainly, in this current environment, it is a little bit difficult to see much support coming for small business. That is just the reality. And we've seen that, steady climb in insolvencies being coupled with that increase in more and more complex rules, be it environmental reporting, changes to industrial relations, and even changes around the administration of superannuation, looking to move that to a weekly basis, which is a good idea in theory and in principle, but a lot of small businesses aren't necessarily ready to absorb a lot of that complex change. So we really are at this bit of an inflection point at the moment, and we need to keep really reminding the government that when they're not addressing small business concerns, they're losing out on a really big productivity opportunity, and they're really putting at risk close to 5 million jobs that are supported by Australian small business.
One would have thought they're putting their own electoral success at risk as well. But anyway, I suppose that's up to them. Briefly, how have you found dealing with this government as people are going to go to the polls soon? Would you describe them as pro-small business?
Look, Jeff, I certainly think they've made some good strides. So I think in the interests of being fair, the government did put forward the National Small Business Strategy, where they've looked to work with various states and territories on actually seeing better collaboration between all the jurisdictions. So one of the things our small business members tell us regularly is that it is not just federal government, it is state, it is local planning rules, it is fair trading rules at a state level, as well as, the federal political environment as well that affects them. So certainly should acknowledge that there has been some development on that front. We certainly have found the government do have an open door. They are open to conversations, and we have had strong engagement with them. But certainly, as I have alluded to earlier, at the end of the day, you have to judge a government on its policies, and we haven't seen a lot of really positive small business policies. In fact, we've seen, a lot of changes to industrial relations and even changes to reporting and other regulations that really are tying up our small businesses in red tape. So there has been some positivity. Probably a couple of highlights are more recently this week, the government providing the ACCC with greater resources to really make sure that franchisees are protected. Unfair contract terms as well is an area that this government has looked at and has actually provided some policy development on. So there was a couple of announcements, interestingly, within the last week. So to your point about the looming federal election, perhaps it's dawning on some of our regulators and policymakers that it's time to put forward their wares for the electorate to see. But we do welcome some of those policies. But again, we just keep coming back to the largest private sector employer, 5 million Australian jobs, training 40% of apprentices and trainees.
Wow.
Really, yeah. So where the small businesses are the trainers of Australia as well as the employers of Australia, we really think, every policy that's put forward should be a positive one for small business. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case in the last 2 years that I've been in this role.
Well, you do walk the halls of federal parliament and knock on doors. Can you predict anything from this budget that you think would be of interest to small business owners?
Well, look, certainly based on what the government and what the Treasurer have been, seemingly signalling to the community about what they want to prioritise in this budget, there has been a fair bit of talk about it being a cost of living budget. Now, whether or not we can solve cost of living in one fell swoop, I think is quite an unlikely happenstance, but certainly the Treasurer has indicated he may be looking at some energy bill relief. And I think any relief on the energy front should be welcomed. We'd like to see that being quite substantial. We'd like to see it being very tailored for small businesses. Certainly last year, the sort of $325 per household. I mean, thanks, that's fantastic. But equally, that number's not really going to touch the sides for a lot of small businesses whose energy bills are in the thousands, if not in the tens of thousands of dollars, and that energy bill shock that they're facing. So certainly the signals we're receiving are some movement around cost of living, looking to maybe look at some of those productivity measures that can help the economy. So obviously the Future Made in Australia program is a big priority for this government. We'd like to see that linked to small business in a more tangible way and making sure that small businesses can benefit from that process. So if we're going to pick some of these big industries for the future that the government's trying to do, things like hydrogen and green steel and these other initiatives, well, that's all well and good, but we need to make sure that small business is able to benefit from that, participate in those supply chains and create jobs in doing so. So they're probably the main areas where we're keeping an eye out for, but we are really hoping to see a dedicated small business statement in the budget. We'd like to see that clear. We'd like to see the Treasurer and the Minister for Small Business really ramming home the importance of our industry for the budget, not just for the sake of itself, but also for the state of the budget and the economy, and really making that link clear between small business and the prosperity of all Australians. We've got our fingers crossed. We'll hopefully hear about that in coming days.
That's Luke Achterstraat, CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.